Hello. Well, it's great to see you. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. How are you, David?
Good. I'd like to spend a little time today. This is the end of having worked together for how long have we been working together?
I'm not sure. I don't remember.
It's pandemic time, sometime during the months, a couple of months, right? Maybe like quickly before we get into the project that we're doing, maybe I'll say a few things about myself, just so people who maybe watch this who don't know who I am can know who I am, and maybe you can say a few things about yourself, and then we'll get into the project. Is that cool?
Yep, sounds good.
Great. So, as you know, Will, but people watching may not know, I'm Dave Flink, and I have dyslexia and ADD, and I'm 40 years old. And 2 decades ago, and some change, I started using my story as a way to help one kid. I started mentoring one kid who learned differently, and I was curious how they may use their story to affect their school or their life. Um, so that kind of began with the chance to chat with you this past summer, Will. So why don't you say a little bit about maybe who you are, and then we can get into the project.
All right. I'm Will Koester. I go to Salisbury School in Salisbury, Connecticut. It's a boarding school, and I have dyslexia and ADHD.
Cool. So let's start off with, maybe for people who are watching this to let them know what the fellowship is. I can talk about that, and then you can talk about your project. So
Yeah.
for years, Adhd has had a fellowship. It's a fellowship that we only offer to young people who have a particular question in an interest area that is theirs, and it relates to learning disabilities. So we've had people who are curious about musicians and learning disabilities. We've had people who are curious about politics and learning disabilities. There are people who are curious about the internet. How is the internet accessible to people who learn differently? The range of projects goes on and on. We generally only select one person, and there's a lot of happy fighting about who gets to mentor that one student. It had been years since I got that privilege, and so that's what I was able to do this summer. So that's why Will and I have been working together this summer. And Will, why don't you tell us about what your project was, and then we can get into sort of the journey of exploring that question.
So my question was, I wanted to know how learning disabilities affected professional athletes and college athletes, specifically D1 athletes, about like their experiences in high school and college, and like what made them great, what motivated them, and how they made it to the level that they're at.
And I will say that, to Will's dismay, perhaps, I didn't know a lot about athletics. So it's been a very interesting summer. I know you're a real fan, Will, could cite statistics that I've never even heard of sports that I didn't even know existed. But I think it's actually led for some really interesting conversations because you had a hypothesis, which is similar to the hypothesis I generally hold about people who learn differently, which is that people who learn differently, I think, can go on and do great things. But you had a very specific hypothesis as it related to professional athletes. What did you think you were going to find going into this project? What did you think about professional players who had learning differences?
So I don't remember my hypothesis, but um, what I thought was I thought it was going to be a challenge to most of them, but however they overcame it by being motivated and just have more passion and drive, and how they made it to their level of athletics, and how they made it to the top of the top of their sport.
Yeah, and I remember early on, something that we kind of discussed was whether or not people would end up sort of revealing that they saw something like dyslexia as a gift or not. And I can't remember. Did you think that they were generally going to say in the end that they felt that it was something that was a gift to them, or did you
Yeah,
feel the opposite?
so most 75% of them said it was like a huge gift, and the other 25% said it was like kind of a big challenge for them. And but they all said that they worked incredibly harder because of having dyslexia or ADHD or dysgraphia.
You mentioned passion as well, and that's something that I was really curious about going into this. I know you're passionate about sports. Listening to you speak got my heart on fire. I've started actually watching sports now because of you. Um, I'm curious, talk to me a little bit about, what you discovered in terms of the role of passion in their lives and how maybe that influenced them. You use the word overcoming, but the overcoming, a lot of the stories that you revealed, I think, had to do with overcoming external adversity. And where did you see passion playing an important role in their lives?
So they all said they were just so passionate about their sports, and you could really feel them like just be really motivated, and which helped them make it to the professionals, and like how much they had to try, like the taking the extra reps, like figuring out which ways worked for them. For example, Javon Hay, he said that he if there was a play for him to go outside, he would say he was going to McDonald's for a restaurant, but if he was going inside, he was going to like his mom's house for dinner. So I found that very cool. To they figured out different ways to make it work for them, which I found really cool.
And I think that maybe was part of the connection of the passion and their different thinking brains. It
Mm-hmm.
sounded to me as you were going through this journey, what one of the discoveries was that they sort of integrated it all into their identity.
Yep.
So if they felt that they had a challenge, they took that challenge and made it an asset so that their passion could thrive.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
realize, people who are listening probably don't know. Like, tell us a little. Like, I know we some of the research that you did was talking to people, and some of it was just like having a conversation about Michael Jordan, who he had ADHD, I think.
Yes, he
Yeah,
did.
and but I really love for you to share just a little bit. Like, tell us who you spoke to directly. I know that reading about lots of people informed of this going in, but who did you speak to, and was there any of those people, or maybe you want to talk about each of them individually, that taught you a particular lesson?
So I spoke to Terry Bradshaw, who was an NFL quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Hall of Famer. I spoke to Javon Hay, who played in the NFL for, I believe, 7 seasons. I spoke to Jewel Lloyd, who was a WNBA player. And I spoke to, uh, I forget his first name, but something,
Josh.
what?
You talking about Josh?
No, someone who ran track at Arizona University.
Okay. Yeah, great. And so interesting also, you spoke to people from different sports,
Hmm.
at different levels. Also, I know Javon now is a coach at Vanderbilt.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
So you kind of got people from different perspectives. And so, curious, you don't feel like you need to talk about each person individually, although you're welcome to, but were there certain threads, certain things that you picked up on, especially thinking about, like, say, Terry Bradshaw, who, he's retired,
Hmm.
versus
Yeah, and
Jewel
he's
Lloyd,
like 70 years old. So
right?
it was interesting. Like I had different levels. Like I have a retired NFL player, someone now who's coaching, but a lot younger, someone who's an active player, and now like an entrepreneur who used to run track and now has his own business, which I found very cool. And
So,
who he
what were you going to say?
Oh, and like they're like two of them are like in their 20s, some of them are in their 30s, and one is like 70 years old. So I found that like a very wide range of ages.
So my question, and we joked a little bit about the difference in our age, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's like 2 generations between us. I know some of our conversations were saying it's amazing how similar we are, regardless of our age difference. And then other times we'd say actually things are pretty different. Did you notice anything that was similar throughout all these players' experiences? And did you notice anything that was fundamentally different? Had things changed because of time?
So the oldest person I spoke to, Terry Bradshaw, like he could really reflect on like what happened and like what happened with his life. And the youngest one who I spoke to, um, he mostly said that he mostly said that like it was like a challenge for him, like getting through school. Even though he said he worked as hard as he could, he said it was mostly like a challenge, and which I found interesting because the more they could reflect on it, the more they thought like it was an asset,
Hmm.
which I found interesting.
I got to sit in on the Jewel Lloyd conversation, and I was intrigued by the fact that she's incredibly public about her
Hmm.
learning experience. Um, I don't know. It was Terry Bradshaw public about it when he was a player. Javon
So he
wrote a
got
book about it. I'm just curious about their public
so
personas.
Terry Bradshaw, he got diagnosed with ADHD at age 50. So he was pretty old. So no one had any idea at his age, or so he had no idea.
Um, I want to ask one last question related to some of the things learning to the players, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about the process for you. But I want to talk about work. I want to sort of wrap up this part of conversation about work because, I've heard that you have a greater chance of being struck by lightning than being in the NFL. Um,
Yeah, it's
and it's a lot of work.
definitely
And I'm sure that's true across the board. You talk to people who've done extraordinary things. What was the theme that you learned around work for these athletes?
mostly passion. Like they were just so passionate and motivated about the game. Like they just loved it, and you could like feel the passion like which they spoke at. Like they love what they did.
Do you think that the learning disabilities in some ways prepared them to be harder workers because they had to maybe work harder in school?
Definitely, because they had to work really hard in school, and like ADHD, it makes you like even more motivated to get it done. So you have passion and motivation, and that's keys to huge success.
Um, Anything before I move into the journey of doing this fellowship that you'd want to like reflect on or share with folks?
Yeah, just like the passion that they had just was unreal.
All right, so these questions are all questions. This is kind of fun. I've never been an interviewer before, so thanks for letting me do this. These are all questions about the process of the fellowship. So the first question I have for you is, this fellowship is it's much more than just a subject to study for a while. It's a journey. You connect with other people on this journey. I mean, obviously you started reading about people, but at the end you actually, I know at the end, like Javon like gave you his contact information. You're one of
Yeah.
the, how old are you? Well, I always forget, I'm sorry.
I'm 17, and I now have two NFL players in my contacts, which is
Right.
pretty cool.
It's pretty rare, right? So
Yeah.
and that's a reflection of you. I mean, you're just an incredible person. Well, I want to know, what did you learn about yourself in this fellowship? Are there ahas about your own experience with a learning difference that because of this journey you now kind of own?
Well, I found it interesting that I could have so much in common with these athletes, and it felt really cool that I had like the same challenges that they had in school, and it's really cool that you're going through the same thing that an NFL quarterback, Hall of Fame NFL quarterback did. So I found that really cool, and you had so much, like I had so much in common with him, like going through school, being like even though I'm not an athlete, I still get motivated by watching sports, and like I just love watching them.
And I think that's a great lesson. We talked, we'll get at the end about the outcome as the last series of questions, but I think just to name this moment here, folks who are watching this interview, you're sharing that with people now, right? Like you can have this listening, even though you weren't in on the conversations, you can now feel a little bit of that too. I'm curious to ask the question about how you learn best and how this experience challenged you to think about that question. I think a lot about just the phrase learning disabilities. As you know, I don't like that phrase.
Hmm.
I believe I have a reading disability because that's what dyslexia is. I struggle with reading, but I learn just fine. And you entered this project, and you really did a multimodal kind of way, right? You read things, you talked to people, you had to deal with me once a week, having interactive conversations. Um, what did you learn about your learning style doing this project? Because for folks who don't know, like you can study any way you want the whole challenge of this fellowship is you come in, you pick a topic you're passionate about, at the end you tell us what you learned. So what did you learn about yourself as a learner doing this over the past couple of months?
Well, definitely. Usually, I would have liked to do it by Zoom because I'm very visual. I'm a visual learner, but that's okay. I still got to talk to them on the phone, which was amazing. But like some people were verbal learners, some people like had to visualize it. Like some people they listened to audiobooks. So like they found different ways. Like there's a lot of different ways you can learn.
So it confirmed some of the thesis that you had about yourself as a visual learner, but it sounds like kind of opened you up to the idea that even if we all had the same quote unquote label, we all are sort of different learners in the end.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Some people are going to watch this and probably want to do a fellowship. Whether you do it formally with Adhd or not, I think it's so important as humans to commit to learning things, to growing. I don't want folks to think it was easy. You're making it sound very easy. I want to know what was frustrating for you about this project, and how did you deal with that frustration?
Oh, my dad knew a few people in the sports world, and he wouldn't reach out to them because he was so busy with work, which kind of made me frustrated. But my mom knows the commissioner of the NFL, so that really helped a lot. Because without her, without that first interview, I would have no idea what to expect. I would have had less interviews, and like I was shaking the entire time talking to these athletes because of how like I look up and like worship some of these athletes, and like to be able to talk to professional athletes just blows my mind.
So I'm hearing something that I think is important for all of us to understand, which is you didn't do it alone.
Oh, yeah.
I know you were nervous coming in. How am I possibly going to do this? And I know you remember you mentioning to me that your mom and your dad were literally your note takers during a couple of these
Oh,
interviews.
yeah. Yeah.
Um,
There's like for me to focus, because it would be impossible for me to focus on the phone call, but also taking notes down. It would have made the experience a lot harder, and it would have taken some of the fun out of it. Because like just scribbling notes down, listening to them, it would have been for someone having dyslexia and ADHD, that can be pretty hard. Just getting the notes on paper, like remembering what they say. Like it could have been very challenging, but my mom and dad helped me out a lot.
I want to name a particular low point because I remember talking to you. You were pretty excited that as soon as you kind of finished your questionnaire and had done sort of a general research of what was available online, you landed your first interview really quickly. And then there was a lull for a while. Uh,
Yeah,
and
and there was a lot of time where I there was a long period in time between my first interview and my second interview.
deal
How
with
many
that
days is that?
frustration. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
what allowed you to say I can keep going? Because we're talking about these players who overcame adversity, found challenges, and overcame adversity, but you did that too. And
yeah.
for
So
people
I
who are
was had
listening,
to research them and read books, and then you actually helped me land some two huge athletes with Jewel Lloyd and Javon Hay, which really brought this thing together.
I want to dig further. I'm not gonna let you off the hook. There was a period of time in between that I know was hard because we didn't know if other people would respond, and you kept showing up. I was so impressed.
Yeah.
Every week you said I sent more emails or I've done more reading, and you didn't give up. And I'm just so curious, how did you do that? Because I know there's somebody watching right now who's in the middle of some frustration, just wishing to get to the other side and wanting to give up. How did you not give up? What caused you to not pick up the phone and say, Dave, I'm out. This is too hard. I'm out. How did you keep showing up?
Well, my dad gives a good lesson for us. He's like, whether you're a gas station attendant, a teacher, professional athlete, you give everything you have and you never give up. Like you do the best at it. Like with this, I did the best job that I could. Whether it's in school, it's a sport, like whatever you do the best job that you possibly can.
That's some good lessons for anyone listening. So I appreciate that a lot. This is the last question on that section, and then we're gonna get to the outcomes. Um, as I mentioned, others might want to do this fellowship either at Adhd or their own self-directed project. Any advice for them? Anything you'd want to tell them?
It's the outcome is amazing. I mean, it's when you work so hard and it really pays off and you get some pretty cool interviews. It it's pretty amazing, but it's hard work. It's not just like you're just going to get an interview, you're going to get another one. Like it's hard to get the interviews, but once and you're going to have some weird interviews like I had, like some of them aren't always the best, and but some of the interviews are amazing.
Any lesson here that you now would apply? You know, you're what, going to school, going back to school next week
Like 3 days.
in like 3 days. So, you know, I'm sure there's going to be some frustrations.
Yep.
It's a new school year. It's a different school year compared to any other for most everybody in America and all over the world.
Mhm.
Do you think that there's any lessons when that next frustration hits that you're going to be able to draw on to push forward? And if
Yeah,
so,
you
yeah,
just got to keep going.
gotta
You
keep
just
going.
got to, because in the end, like whether it's college or you get a job, it's all going to be worth it. It's all going to be worth the grind and the fighting.
Cool. Well, that's a perfect transition to the final questions around outcomes. So, how has this project confirmed or challenged your thinking about learning disabilities and ADHD?
It confirms it because you really try harder. Like it's like you need to try harder when you're a little bit of a disadvantage. Like you have to try harder and out and outbeat everyone. Like you have to like you really have to work harder. It's a challenge, but it pays off in the end.
How has this project confirmed or challenged your thinking about athletics?
Not everyone's perfect, even though I think they are, and they're like almost all perfect. Even though if they make a mistake, you still think like, but we're all human. We're all human, and we all have our challenges at some point.
Yeah, it's what you do with them, right?
Yep.
Those are the ends of my questions. I just want to give you the space for any kind of closing remarks you want to share with me, with anyone who might be listening.
Just always keep fighting. Like always send an extra email. Like if they don't respond, email them again. And usually they'll get back to you, but don't get too mad if they don't.
Anything to the broader, like, learning different community, you know, speaking on, you know, on behalf as someone with lived experience. You're in school right now, you're you know, closer to the end of your K-12 journey than the beginning.
Hmm.
Anything you'd want to say? You know, some of the people who are listening are probably going to be, you know, much younger than you. What would you say to your younger self right now if you could?
Um, well, I would say to like my younger self, like you got to try extremely hard. Like you're not going to get a good paying job. You're not going to go to a good college if you don't try extremely hard.
Your tenacity, your commitment, your confidence, it shines through. It has been an unbelievable joy getting to do this with you. And we're going to stay in touch, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Well, thanks so very, very much. This is amazing.